dispute essentially about privatisation. You know, this is something that's been going on for a very long time, and I suppose we're all supposed to take it entirely for granted now that services can be privatised. No threat to the national collection. No threat to the art. You understand? Yeah, a bit like the National Health Service, really. No threat to the National Health Service. It's just that private companies will organise the delivery of the services. So that's the root of the dispute. It's been pursued quite aggressively by the employers in the National Gallery on two counts. One is that they haven't done what you normally do, well, particularly in advance of the general election, and say privatisation. Don't worry, you'll all keep your terms and conditions. They'll be legally protected, and of course we'll recognise the unions and we'll take on new people on the same terms and conditions. They haven't said that. They've pointedly refused to accept that the London living wage should apply, even though all of the current gallery staff earn at least the London living wage. They pointedly refused that. And it's a cause which has been taken up by, to be fair, by a lot of people who've shown brilliant support for the gallery staff, including Polly Toynbee. I would recommend her writing on the subject to you as being quite a good guide to what's happening. The other way in which they're being extremely aggressive, and this I think is also, perhaps ought to be a general election issue, is that the bog standard response of employers at the moment seems to be, their default mode seems to be, if it moves, sack it. If you have a dispute, sack the ringleaders. And so the trade union official, the elected local official for PCS members in the National Gallery, Kanya Wynne, has been suspended for the heinous crime of briefing one of my colleagues, a full-time officer for the National Galleries and the Culture Secretary in PCS, about aspects of the cost of the part which is of the privatisation which has already been forced through, and for that she's been suspended from the job and essentially taken out of the game in a victimisation. So those are the two things. Absolutely aggressive tactics on the part of the employer and the victimisation of the workers' representatives. And those things I think are a general election issue. Unfortunately, I can't stay to ask a question, but if people are asking questions of the candidates, one of the questions that I would be very interested to hear replies about is what is going to be done to legally protect employees' rights at work, trade union rights, and to stop victimisations and to stop this insane drive to destroy trade union rights in this country. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'm having a look at words at me. I'm guessing somebody wants me to suggest that there's a collection of the strikers.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, we'll start the meeting proper. As advertised now, thank you all for coming. It's a really great turnout. It's really to see so much interest in tonight's meeting. Austerity is a failed experiment, being the theme. We've got with us several speakers. Oh, sorry, yes. My name's Jane Meatley. I'm from the Sheffield People's Assembly. We've organised tonight's meeting in partnership with the Festival of Sheffield, who are promoting and helping to organise a series of events around the city over the coming weeks in the run-up to the election. So that's me and the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly is a broad, united campaign, part of a national campaign, pulling together all those who are opposed to the current austerity agenda across all the political parties, trade unions, trade groups, community groups, campaign groups, unions. It's a broad brush umbrella organisation. If you're interested in keeping in touch with what we're doing, locally and nationally, just make sure you've signed in or signing on your way out, and we can put you on the circulation list for other events and activities and actions around the Sheffield area. Tonight we were going to try and have a Skype link up with Teresa from Greece, who were going to tell us a bit about their experience of being the only party elected in Europe on an anti-austerity platform. Unfortunately, we've not been able to get that organised. to a standard at the next election to get their views on austerity. That if you do oppose the current agenda of cuts, how do you vote in this forthcoming election? Do you vote at all? And where do people stand on it? We did invite more people than have come tonight, so we're very grateful to our speakers for deciding to come and put themselves before this audience that might be quite challenging. We did invite every Lib Dem person in the city that we could track down, councillors and prospective MPs, and none of them were able to come. So who we have tonight is we have two Sheffield Hallam candidates, which is Oliver Coppard for the Labour Party and Peter Garbutt for the Greens. So that'll be interesting. They're battling it out against Midland in Sheffield Hallam. And the other candidates we've got is Steve Andrew from the Communist Party, who's standing in the central constituency, and Maxine Bowler for the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, who's standing in Brightside and Hillsborough. So the format of the meeting, I'm going to ask them in turn in a moment to give us 10 minutes or so on their position really on austerity. Why, if you oppose that agenda, you might consider voting for them, what their position is. I'll then open you up to the floor for questions. And I will try and be really quite strict that people pose questions that speakers can come back at, so it's dynamic rather than getting up and making a long-winded point. So you might be sneaking something, but you've got to do it quickly in the form of a question. And we'll go back and forth. Let's come back on now. We need to be out for 9, really. So I'll aim to put the main body meeting at 7:45, and there's a few announcements at the end of up-and-coming activities and actions and things that are going on, just to inform you all. Okay? So without further ado, I think the bucket will stop rattling shortly, and we'll open it up to our first speaker, along with Steve Andrew from the Communist Party, Central and Central Ward.
Cheers. This is only people who are meeting for change. Somebody wrote to over here. Don't actually know everybody, so thanks for coming to turn up. My name's Steve, I'm standing for CP, Sheffield Central. Go way background, I'm 45. I originally come from Lee, which for those of you know for geography, it's just north of Manchester. I come from a mining background. Both my parents worked for Coppard, and my grandparents and my great-grandparents actually. I worked in Sheffield as a librarian, member of public libraries, member of public sector for 12, 13 years, before Sheffield City Council. Sheffield Labour Party dominated City Council, took my job away from me, and I'm now working in social care. I'm a proud member of the Communist Party and also a proud member of VGMB. I'm not going to spend too much time analysing the case against cuts and austerity, and I assume that most of you here have had some sort of participation on the left on the anti-caps campaign through People's Assembly or some other bodies. But let's just get a few things right. You know, and this set scenario for good speakers as well. We don't all be in this together. We are not all in this together. Second thing is, some people are feeling the effects of these cuts and some not at all. If you're poor, if you're disabled, if you have to go to that obscenity we have now in this country called food banks, if you're on casualised contracts, if you're on 0 hours, you're being affected. Some people not affected at all. In fact, it's worth noticing that the last few years has actually seen a massive transfer of wealth and resources to the top 1,000 richest people in Britain. The rich are laughing at us. They're laughing at us all the way to the banks. And that's if we don't own the banks in the first place. That's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in 2015. Finally, fourth point. And let's see how much the other speakers agree to this as well. This is an anti-cuts, anti-austerity meeting. I'm saying now, there is no case whatsoever, no need for any cuts, any austerity in the first place. Let's go on. How often do you see that, a long and reasoned argument made for that in the mainstream media? Never. Post-1945, our country was in a much more economically weaker position then than it is today. And yet it managed to create the framework for the NHS, for education, managed to invest in people, managed to create more social housing than we've seen ever since. And yet it can't do it today. Why can't it do it today? Because it so doesn't want to. There's no will, there's no direction. And when the Tories first announced their cause, did they sit there and sit down, fold their arms and look very grim, saying, it's a grim necessity of a world economic crisis? No, they stood up and they cheered. They cheered, we went to pathetic handkerchiefs. Because they knew they were winning. Cuts and austerity is an act, for them, a victory in the class war. They're celebrating because they can go give us a good shoeing. And that's what it's about. Not because they have to, it's because they can. Britain, by any indice, is the 4th or 5th wealthiest industrialist country in the world. It can afford to deliver an excellent public services. It can afford to invest in jobs and in manufacturing. It can afford to start creating the framework of a socially just and ecologically sustainable world. The fact that it doesn't do is because it doesn't want to. That's what cuts and austerity is about. So let's look to the official opposition. I'm not going to preach unity where I think it doesn't exist. Let's be clear from the start. The CPB, there's no other alternative at the moment to a Labour-led government. We stand there. And that's why we support our members and our supporters in the overwhelming number of constituencies voting Labour. Some parables to some people, that's real politics. We live in the real world, let's not escape from that. Vote Labour and Grimmie sometimes. We have to do it. But I don't mean we have to be, but let's be honest about what we can expect from the next Labour administration. Let's look at the last one, for starters. Despite some limited investment in health and education, and even that wasn't being tied. Let's not mention the war. No, let's not mention the war. Let's not mention the war. They did it. I'm still waiting for the apologies. We're not there. From what people in Sheffield Labour Party, we've still not apologised, we've still not come clean about why we supported it and how long we were to do it. And let's look at privatisation, let's look at PFI. They kick-started a process which the Tories took up now. It wouldn't have been so easy for the Tories if they hadn't started it. And when they bailed out the banks, what preconditions did we put on the banks? They said, oh, here's some money. Did we say stop the fat cap bonuses? Did we say lower your interest rates? They did nothing. They bailed out the banks, the biggest act of fake nationalisation ever. And today, have we moved away from that? Have we seen a change from new Labour to old Labour, even that traditional social democratic thing? We've not. They subscribe to neoliberal orthodoxy. They don't present a convincing case against cuts and austerity because they can't. Because to do so would mean they'd have to advance class-based socialist politics, and they'll never do that. Ed Miliband is happier. How many people saw that picture of him advertising the Sun? Yeah? Standing there with Murdoch's 3-daily paper. And that was at a time that even the Sun had to apologise to victims of the Ulster disaster. We'd have to come clean about that. About all the phone tapping scandal. And this is from someone who wouldn't share a platform with Bob Crow at the Durham Miners Gala. He chooses his friends, and by your friends know them. They're his mates. And that's what you can expect from the next government. I mean, for God's sake, Kinnock was bad enough during the miners' strike. Can any of us imagine Ed Miliband standing on a picket line? Has anyone got a picture of it? £10 for somebody who can show me one. You'll be waiting a long time. It won't support half the action by unison. This is people who are defending their jobs and livelihood, which we're being undercut now. If you don't get support now, when we're out of power, you're not going to get it when the buggers are in power. Oh, let's look at Sheffield City Council. What a shower sometimes. Hey? 0-hour contracts. Casualisation. Yeah? Outsourcing when we don't need to. Even when we don't need to under Tory legislation, we still do it. Refusal to pay a living wage to those private companies which we've outsourced contracts to, as my union points out, we still don't pay them. Shut down short staff. Decimated the library service. There's almost to ask questions about the library service, and the biggest contract this council have done feel free to ask it later on. I haven't got time for it now. But let's talk about that. You know what I think is, if they'd have turned around to us and said, we've had to do these things, you know, it's not clay plus. We can't repeat these things, we can't refuse to do it. We're having to do it because it cuts on central government. And I thought, yeah, maybe there's an argument against it. But not once have they made a political argument against cuts and austerity in this city or nationally, because they won't do, and that's the reality. So why vote communist? I mean, it's easy to select them off anyway. Why vote communist? Our biggest platform for this election is tax the rich. Make them pay. They created this crisis. Make them pay. We didn't. Wasn't me. So stop the evasion, stop the loopholes, stop the offshore banking. Just make them pay for what they bloody owe, for starters. You know, make them pay and say that we have to pay as individuals. Osborne says it's not his responsibility to tax top dodgers. Let's make it our responsibility. Let's stop capital flight, impose tax on windfall profits. And let's have an income tax system which is true progressive. And let's also, as part of that, let's nationalise banks. We've given enough money in the past, so nationalise without compensation. Bring it under our control. Force them to, you know, let's roll interest rates. Ease it up on people buying homes for the first time. No reason why we can't. Support small businesses. No reason why we can't. Invest in jobs and manufacturing. These aren't even socialist arguments. It's what successful economies like Germany do without thinking about it. We've got an unregulated, you know, absolutely out of control financial sector, so easy to take back under control. Thirdly, let's stop tyrants. Let's get rid of all these imperialist red overtures. Not in my interest. Not only do they cost lives, they cost billions of pounds which we spent elsewhere. Let's stop the private sector bleeding the public sector dry. And that's what's happening, rather than the other way around. Let's put an end to PFI and privatisation. Let's renationalise British Rail. Let's renationalise British Rail. 5 times the public subsidy than we had when it was British Rail. For what? Cost for inefficient service. And while we're there, let's renationalise gas, water, electricity. Let's withdraw from the EU. And that's the key thing, because many of the things we're talking about in the anti-cuts and anti-austerity movement, it's not going to happen, it's not going to work, unless we get that withdrawal. It's undemocratic, it's unreformable, but fundamentally, it acts in the interests of the big business, the banks and the monopolies. It was set up in their interests. And always will act in their interests. Let's scrap the bedroom tax, raise the minimum wage, make these sort of contracts illegal. At least it sounds like some old-fashioned Keynesian, you know, Keynesianist. If people can't pay for goods and services, what sort of market we're going to have in the first place? But when we start making these inroads into capitalist power, into state power, we end up with the question of not so much as where are all the money going to come from, but actually, how are we going to spend it? And that's the alternative. How are we going to spend it? Let's get to that stage. As socialists, as communists, you know, another world isn't just necessary, it's possible. Change can come. It happened in October, it happened in Cuba, it's happened in Venezuela, it's happened with our own freedom riders of South Yorkshire. If you believe change is possible, if you believe you can fight City Hall, and you live in Sheffield Central, vote Communist on May the 7th.
Thank you, Tony, for coming, and I think it's really good that there's a debate taking place, really. I'm standing for the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, which is an attempt really to unite the left together so that we have a unified left standing across the country. And we actually are standing in all the council seats in Sheffield and three of the MPs. We're not standing against Steve, because I think we probably have quite a lot in common with what Steve is standing for, and therefore we will probably vote for Steve in Central as well. And the reason that we have tried to form this coalition really is that we think that there is a massive crisis of representation for working class people in this country. I feel that there is a complete disenfranchisement. If you go out on the knocker, if you stand on stools on that we are facing with people. And I think this year there's a bigger gulf than there has ever been between ordinary people and the politicians. And for many people, politics is seen as being something that is absolutely dirty, really. Politics is something, despite the MPs' expenses scandals, really, they haven't cleared their act up. MPs like Rifkin and Straw, for whom £67,000, plus the massive expenses that they take on top of that, is simply not enough for them to live on. To be honest, these people ought to come and live the kind of lives that ordinary people have to live in this city, particularly in places like Brightside and Hillsborough, which is one of the 10th most deprived constituencies in the country. And I think for ordinary people, it's quite shocking to see that they're doing this. Then you have Afzal Amin, the Tory candidate for Dudley North, who is prepared to do the deal with the devil, really, with the EDL, to try and get himself elected. And to me, that just absolutely stinks, really, in terms of what they've done. And I think we don't need career politicians. We don't need Eton boys. What we need is people who've been involved in the movement, people who are prepared to stand up for ordinary people to defend their rights, people who are based on a tradition of class struggle. For myself, I'm a community worker. That means on a day-to-day basis, I'm seeing all sorts of people who are hit by the cuts that are taking place, who are trying to get benefits, who are being sanctioned by the phenomenal growth of sanctions that have gone on. And I've been a lifelong trade unionist, and I'm a member of the Trades Council Executive at the moment. I've been a campaigner against the war, very keen to stop the war coalition, and for the rights of the Palestinians, because again, it's a disgrace what's happening to the Palestinians. And also I've been heavily involved in opposing racism and the rise of fascism, because I think that's the flip side. If we don't have representation, then people can be pulled towards those rotten, backward ideas. And therefore, it's important to be involved in them. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold as well, so you'll have to bear with me a bit. We in Tusk, one of the things that we in Tusk have pledged to do is we have pledged that we will take the average wage of the people inside Sheffield, and the rest of the money will be given to the constituencies. And I think it's important to say that, because that means that we are like the rest of the people. We're not above them, we're not in this bubble above them with so much money. Actually saying that we will take the average wage is quite important. Secondly, I don't think anyone's standing up for ordinary people. And austerity means increasing misery, uncertainty and alienation. I can't emphasise this point enough, really. I think that they feel taken for granted, people feel in despair, and I'm sick and tired of being told that there is no alternative to austerity, because I believe there is an alternative to austerity. You know, you think about it, first of all, we bail out the banks to the tune of 1.4 trillion. I mean, these are figures that are unimaginable to ordinary people. Then we're told that the economy's broke, and somehow we're going to have to bail this out. It's not the bosses or the people with the money who've been bailing it out, it's the ordinary people at the bottom who've been bailing it out. I tell you, it seems to me that they've used austerity to rob the poorest people and stuff it in the back pockets of the rich. Yeah. That's what they've done at every turn. And I tell you, I can sort of almost prove it, really. Workers' wages have fallen in real terms by 8% between 2008 and 2013, with young workers being hit the hardest. Benefits and pensions have been falling even faster. In 1967, unemployment benefits were 28% of average earnings. By 2013, they are 13%. That's a massive decrease, really, in terms of people's living standards. For pensioners, it's similar. They've fallen from 26% in 1980 to 16% in 2008. And can you remember, Steve said it, the old mantra, we're all in it together, we're all in the same boat. Well, I'll tell you, we're not in the same boat. If we're in the same boat, our boat is sinking, and them lot, they must be being rescued, and we're certainly not. And so if you look at what's happened during this period of so-called austerity that's been taking place, the top 1% got not twice as wealthy as they were 5 years ago. That's the absolute scandal of what has been taking place during this period of austerity. We have £7 trillion offshore, money that is held offshore by the rich. £120 billion in tax that's been avoided. When we talk about a hole in the economy, they need to collect that tax, £120 billion of it. And look at the way in which people are treated. If you're poor and you have 50 pence too much benefits, and to be honest, benefits are so low, I can't believe you can even live on it, then you will be hounded. If you're rich and they discover you've had money, they'll come to a gentleman's agreement with you, shake your hand. I used to work in the civil service. And we used to say it was pay as you earn and pay as you like. If you've got enough money to employ a rich accountant, you can find ways of fiddling your tax and making sure you don't pay it. And that's exactly what has been going on. And austerity really has been a way of redistributing the wealth from the poorest people to the richest people. It's not a
Good evening, thank you for inviting me. It's great to see so many people here talking about austerity. A lot of people may not know that the Green Party is very strongly against austerity. We know that the other parties, Conservatives, the Lib Dems and Labour, are aiming to spend about 35% of GDP. That's government spending. That's why austerity is taking place. They've got to cut it until it gets down to 35%. This is because of the free market economic theory, which nearly everybody at the top believes in. Most people at the top. And we are being forced to believe in it. Every message that comes across in the media, on television, on the radio, in the papers, special papers like the Daily Mail, is pushing the fact that we're all in it together. We aren't, we've had that before. But we have to have austerity, there is no alternative. We heard that from Mrs. Thatcher. It wasn't true then. It isn't true now. Countries, for example, like Germany, spend about 45% government spending. 45% of their GDP is government spending. Last year, Germany abolished tuition fees for university students. That's something we, as the Green Party, aim to do as well. Our aim, when our manifesto is published in the next few days, you will see, our aim is to spend about 46% of GDP. So there's a wide gap there. And I think Steve was saying, what can we spend that money on? First of all, I'm going to tell you how we will raise the money. If we form a government, or if we have significant influence within that government, we will do these things. First of all, yes, we will abolish trident. We'll get rid of trident. We'll get rid of anything to replace trident. It is nothing more than a ticket to the top table in international diplomacy. If you've got nuclear weapons, you're okay in the UN. That's what it is. It's nothing more than that. Nobody's going to use trident. The minute you start thinking about using trident, you've lost. You might as well go home. Nobody's going to use trident. We'll also get rid of HS2. Now that might be something that people here don't agree with. But HS2 is more likely to funnel a wealth down from the north into the London area, rather than from London up into the north. So we would get rid of HS2. That's about £45 billion. So far we've saved about £145 billion. And I've just mentioned two things. We'd also get rid of the new road scheme. That's another £15 billion. We do an awful lot of things around transport with that money, but it wouldn't be on White Elephant HS2, and it wouldn't be on carbon-clogged roads. So those are just three of the things, and we've already raised 160 billion pounds. What else did we do? Top rate of tax, 60%. We'd raise a wealth tax on the richest 1% of people in the country. That raises a hell of a lot of money. That's £20 billion a year, something like that. The financial transactions tax, also called the Robin Hood tax, because it takes from the rich and gives to the poor. And that's a tax that you and I don't pay because we haven't got the money to make the kind of financial transactions we're talking about. We're talking about really big financial transactions. And even if we only take 0.5%, that's another £20 billion. I could go on. By 2019, we aim to take, I think it's something like an extra 190 billion pounds in extra taxes. Don't let's forget what we've saved in Trident and the others. Someone was mentioning those people who get away with not paying any tax. We've got the international companies who operate in this country, people like Starbucks. They pay very little tax because they do all the financial trickery. I used to be an accountant. I left it. I couldn't stand it. They do all the international trickery, all the, we've got loan interest to pay here, and management fees to pay there, always to places that are tax havens. And so they pay it and they end up with no profits in this country because they've managed to manipulate that. Well, we're going to stop that happening. We have to stop it happening because if we don't, not only our country, but a whole load of countries around the world, even the USA suffers from this. They have to be part of stopping this as well. So if we get into any position of power, we will be trying very hard to stop every one of these tax dodges.
Hi, I'm Oliver. I'm the Labour Party's candidate in Sheffield Parliament. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it is truly fantastic to see so many people here in the audience. I guess I should start by just saying that it would be relatively easy for me to stand here and tell you a number of things about austerity and about the Labour Party's position, which you would frankly know not to be true. So I'm going to tell you the truth about the Labour Party. I'm going to talk to you, thank you. I'm going to talk to you about what our plans are for the next Labour government and how that differs from not just the Tories' plans and the Lib Dems' plans, but some of the plans you've heard this evening. And hopefully we can have a sort of a decent discussion after that and to take questions. I should probably just tell you first a bit about me personally, so you know who's talking to you. I was born and raised in Sheffield, Hallam, grew up in Sheffield, spent most of my life in this city. I currently work in local government and have done for the past 5 years, so that hopefully I count one of the normal people that we've heard we want politicians to be like. I work out in the Durham Valley, and I work in the ex-coal mining communities of South Yorkshire, so I see the effects of the last Thatcher government, the Tory government, and what effect that had on our community. My job is to develop and grow low carbon projects and to use the low carbon economy to try and develop private prosperity in some of those areas that have been hardest hit by the problems that we saw in the 1980s and the closure of the coal mining community around there. I've seen the effect of this government on public services, particularly on local government. So when Peter talks about local government being squeezed, I know firsthand what that feels like. I've seen the desks open up at my work. I've seen the people, the good people, the hard-working people doing great jobs being made redundant. And everybody being asked to work 2-3 jobs effectively in order to keep services going. And it's tough, and I felt it. And at the election in May, there will be 2 choices. There will be a choice between a Labour government and there will be a choice between a Tory government with Lib Dem support. So that there are your 2 choices. You can have one of those 2 things at this next election. And in Sheffield, Hallam, it increasingly looks like it's either going to, with all due respect, it looks like it's either going to be me or Nick Clegg that ends up as the next MP for Sheffield. That's what the polling shows. So that's the choice at the next election. And we've heard a number of things about the Labour Party and what the Labour Party did when we were in government last time round. And we've heard a number of things about what the Labour Party is apparently going to do. Well, what I'm here to tell you is, I don't think that's necessarily all right, actually. Let's just be very clear about what we're facing if we get another 5 years of this government. So, under this government, I think I probably agree, I think everybody in this room agrees, that we've seen a failed experiment on the economy. And the economy that they have created does not work. And it does not work for working people, it does not work for the vast majority of people in our communities. Working people are £1,600 worse off. We've seen the slowest recovery in the past 100 years. This government have borrowed £250 billion more than they planned to in 2010. They promised to get rid of the deficit and they haven't even halved it. So I think we're very clear, all of us, in the Labour Party, but also everybody in this room, that the economy that this government, the economic strategy this government has followed, has wholeheartedly and comprehensively failed. And what effect has that had? Well, the effect it's had on people in my community has been stark. So, in Sheffield, we now have, as I'm sure you know, 12 food banks. One of those food banks is in Crooks, which is one of the wealthiest parts of our city, if not our country. And yet we still have 1 million people across our country that rely on those food banks. We have 700,000 people on 0-hour contracts, which sucks the life out of their working lives and makes their lives incredibly difficult. We've seen NHS privatisation and fragmentation, something that we were promised would not happen, certainly by the Tories, but also by Nick Clegg. And yet that NHS privatisation and fragmentation has cost us £3 billion which has been taken away from frontline care. I'm a member of Unison, proud member of Unison, and I've been out with workers from the NHS when they've been on strike against this government's plans, or the lack of their plans, to support the 1% pay increase. That the independent pay review body that was put in place by the Labour government was not agreed by this government, and I've been out with workers to support them. The last budget, just the other day, showed the threat that they offer to public services if they're re-elected. The OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the body that they set up to be an independent arbiter of the economy and tell people exactly what's about to happen, or has happened, said that under the next government, under the Tory plans, we will see a roller coaster profile for public spending. And what that basically means is they will cut to the bone right up until the last year before the next election, at which point they will start spending money and trying to prove that they haven't actually been all that bad, have they? That's what they will do. And I don't know about you, but I find that pretty terrifying. I find their plans for this country, for our community, particularly for the north of our country, frightening. And I don't want to see this government re-elected, and that's why I'm working tirelessly in Sheffield Palace, knocking on doors every single day, in order to stop a repeat of this Tory Lib Dem coalition and hold Nick Clegg to account. But I do think that the Labour Party has a strong story to tell, and we heard earlier that there is no difference we heard, between the Labour Party and this government. And quite frankly, there is a gulf, a chasm, between the Labour Party. So let me tell you about what's going to happen if we have a Labour government. Or let me tell you what's going to happen if we get this government re-elected. We're planning to scrap the bedroom tax. This government will keep it in place. We're planning to get rid of the gagging law. This government will keep it in place. We're planning to scrap the NHS Health and Social Care Act and put the NHS back where it was. We're planning on putting £12.5 billion extra into the NHS. This government will keep on with the agenda that they have, privatising and fragmenting those services that we all rely on. This government will keep on cutting cities like Sheffield to the bone through their local government funding formula, which sends more money down to Surrey. We will change that local government funding formula so there is a fair proportion of money spent in our city so the north can grow just as quickly as the south.